a large and really important section of the specification, which is the legal structure of a business. Make sure that you listen to this presentation because it's very commonly a question on the exam. So we're going to go very, very briefly over these factors because you just need to have an awareness really, but it's very much the characteristics of sole traders, partnerships, private limited companies and public limited companies that you need to know about, and the advantages and disadvantages of operating of them, because you often get an evaluative question asking should a company change, or should a business change from one structure to another structure. So very quickly, privatisation is just the process of going from the public sector, so where a business is owned, run and financed by the government or local authority, and transferring it to the private sector. Whereas nationalisation is just the opposite way around. It's going from the private sector into the public sector. So privatisation, we had a really big programme of this during the 80s and early 90s, and a little bit before that for British Petroleum as well, actually. But you can see anything that started with British before it was most likely a public sector industry, and then eventually got sold off. But we did have a big programme of this. And nationalisation is a little bit rarer, but in recent years, because of the recession and because of the credit crunch, some banks were completely or partly nationalised to save them from failing. But why do we tend to privatise? Well, when you sell something off, when the government sells something off, they get money for it, so it creates a capital inflow for the government. And the idea is that organisations, because in the public sector you don't have a profit motive, but in the private sector you do, organisations should strive to become more efficient if they do have a profit motive, and that'll motivate them to cut costs and produce products that people want and increase the quality. So that was the thinking behind it. So just a broad overview. So that was the private sector and the public sector. So when you're going from private into public, if you're changing, that would be nationalisation. If you're going from public to private, that's privatisation. And under here we have sole trader partnerships, LTDs and PLCs, which is what we're looking at today. Just a short recap, these are some of the objectives of the private sector, definitely for-profit businesses these would be. So profit being important for the owners, that's usually why they've set up business. Survival, because you want to be able to make profit in the future, maybe you're going through a tough time because of the economy, or maybe it's just because you've just set up. And maybe market power or market share, because you want to be able to command a higher price, or you want to make more profit. Okay, so sole trader then. Well, a sole trader just means, sole just means it's owned by one person, and they have unlimited liability, and that means that the law sees them as the same as the business. So if the business generates a debt, if they owe a supplier an amount of money and the business can't pay, well, the government doesn't see the person that owns the business and the business as separate entities, so they'll just go to the person and say, well, we'll take your house or we'll take your car to be able to pay this debt off. So it means that you're personally liable for any debt if you've got unlimited liability. One common mistake that students make is that they make this assumption that being a sole trader means there's only one person in the business, but you can actually employ other people. There can be lots of people in the business. Sole trader just refers to there being one owner of the business. If you want more than one owner, you'd have to have a partnership, which is defined as being owned by 2 to 20 partners. That's what we call the owners, the partners. In reality, you get partnerships with a lot more partners than that, but in simplistic terms, they have 2 to 20 partners. A deed of partnership is just a binding legal document that states the formal rights of the partners, so how much they sort of own of the business, I suppose, and the kind of working rights and conditions. But very similar to a sole trader, as in that they have unlimited liability. Then you get the two incorporated businesses. So this means, incorporated just means that we can put that word company behind it. So private limited company there, and public limited company, PLC, and LTD. And it means that in the eyes of the law, the business is separate from the owners. So that means they've got limited liability, and the owners are only liable, only responsible for the amount they've invested in the business. So they can only lose what they've invested, and that stands for both LTDs and PLCs. They both have limited liability. But the difference between an LTD and a PLC, the main difference is who can buy shares. So with an LTD, you can't sell your shares on a stock market. You can just sell them privately, which is why it's called private limited company. So friends or family can buy them. They don't have to be really, you don't have to be best friends, besties with someone for them to buy a share in your business. So in the Dragon's Den, those are mainly LTDs, and when they're asking for, an investment, they're saying basically to Dragons, will you become shareholders? So they don't have to have known them for very long. You can sell the shares to whoever you want. You just can't sell them on a stock market. Whereas a PLC, you can sell the shares to anybody, and you can sell them in a stock market, which means that it's easier to raise finance if you're a PLC. So let's just have a brief overview. Number of owners, sole trader, obviously one. LTD and PLC, you can have shareholders, so lots and lots of owners. And a PLC, because it's traded on a stock market, will have absolutely loads of shareholders. Typically, sole traders and partnerships are run by the partners and the sole trader themselves, whereas with an LTD and a PLC, the shareholders elect a board of directors, so those are the people who are going to kind of rubber stamp or okay the major decisions, and they elect a managing director to run the business, or with a PLC usually they call them a CEO, a chief executive officer, to run the business. And they probably have shares in the business themselves, or if they elect a new CEO, they probably give them some shares. So they're kind of tying the performance of the company to the interests of the CEO. Partnerships and sole traders both have unlimited liability, so kind of risky businesses, you're liable for all of the debts of the company, whereas LTDs and PLCs have limited liability. And the reason is because no one would buy shares in something if you bought a share for £3 and you could be liable for debts of up to like £1 million. You wouldn't do it, would you? It'd be too much risk for a small amount of dividends. So that's why they have limited liability. But the main difference is PLCs can trade their shares on a stock market. So what you need to know is the pros and cons of sole traders. So main advantage of a sole trader is easy to set up. A disadvantage would be the unlimited liability. I'm just going to make all of this a little bit smaller so it all stays on one line. Okay, so unlimited liability would be another disadvantage of that. Another advantage of being a sole trader, you don't have to publish accounts. At least, you have to create your accounts because you're going to be liable for tax, but you don't have to publish them, so competitors aren't going to see those. Whereas a disadvantage would be there's only one, kind of owner, and you can talk about the stress of that on one person, and what if they become ill, or what if they, want to go on holiday. There's no one else kind of in a kind of partnership to help them run that. So partnerships then. Let's have a look at this one then. The benefits, you can share the workload. You can also specialise in certain areas. I'm just thinking of solicitors really, because they're very commonly partnerships, and one might specialise in a certain type of law like family law, and the other might specialise in another law like criminal law or things like that. However, there may be disagreements that can occur because they're all joint owners and all meant to be, making the decisions. So maybe like too many cooks spoil the broth kind of idea. Another advantage of a partnership, what could we say? We can say, you can introduce new partners for more money, or more capital could be introduced into the business. That's just straight onto the other side. Let's make sure it goes onto that side there. Whereas obviously a negative would be, again, the unlimited liability. that you face, again with a partnership. So the advantages of a LTD, therefore, would be, so when we're looking at private limited companies, this is one of the first ones that we've looked at, that actually they have limited liability. Let's make this a bit smaller. However, disadvantage is that you do have to publish your accounts. And the problem with that is that competitors can see how you've been doing, how you've been performing, and you can get a lot of information from company accounts as well. So it's less private, I suppose, for the business. Another advantage is, as well as kind of selling shares to gain capital, or to introduce capital into your business, you know, there's more trust from banks as well as kind of customers and suppliers as well. So they might be willing to lend you more money or at a lower rate, or customers might be more willing to do business with you if they know you're a company, so you're quite established, especially if they've not heard of you before. They know, well, they're an LTD. However, a disadvantage is that you have to register with Companies House. That it requires a cost and a legal cost of kind of setting up as an LTD. So what I'm going to do actually is try and copy this across to this one and see if we we can have the same things. So so again, with a public limited company, they have, what's happening here? They have limited liability, and they also have to publish accounts. And it's actually easier to find the accounts of public limited companies as well. So again, competitors can find information about your business. It's really easy to sell shares with a public limited company, for a public limited company, because they can sell on the stock market, so it's even easier. Again, you have to register with Companies House, but you also have to be approved to sell your shares on the particular stock market that you're going for. So the LSE, which is the London Stock Exchange, it costs quite a lot to go through their due diligence process, which is just the process that they check that you're a legitimate company that's not doing anything kind of untoward, because they wouldn't want to be selling shares for a kind of dodgy company, because that could really undermine the trust in their stock exchange. So it would be expensive. And again, banks and customers trust you as a PLC a little bit more than, say, a sole trader, because you've had to go through that due diligence process with the stock exchange. So usually you get quite nice questions: should they change from a sole trader to an LTD, or partnership to a PLC? But this question was quite difficult. This was from 2010, January. Discuss whether or not innocent LTD, so already a private limited company, should become a public limited company. So I'm just going to jump ahead to the MART scheme. So you might say, well, there's not much difference between the two, so how can I really make a good answer out of that? But, you know, talk about the similarities. So they maintain limited liability, so less risk. They might find it easier to grow because you introduce huge amounts of money can be raised from the sale of shares because you're on the stock exchange, so you might be able to grow your market power. Economies of scale if you grow as well, so cheaper average costs. May gain presence and dominance in the market if you grow, and often easier to raise finance. Banks are more willing to lend to PLCs. However, disadvantages: setup costs can run into the millions for some businesses that float on a stock exchange. It's easy to lose control. Oh, that's a fantastic one, actually. So if you're selling your shares on the stock market, easy to lose control of the business. If you're selling shares on the, I might make this a little bit smaller, actually, to fit in a little bit better. So we can move that one across there. a bit better, a bit more aligned. Easy to lose control of the business because you've got those owners, very easy to buy shares, and so they are able to acquire a number of shares, and then they get more voting rights. And if they get 51% of the company, they've got control of the company. So you've got to be careful how many shares you actually sell. We could say greater divorce of ownership and control in a private limited company. So Innocent's board may lose control. So following on from that point we made before, accounts can now be inspected by the public or competitors. You can actually inspect LTDs, but you might have to just pay a small fee, and they're not as easy to get hold of on the internet as PLCs are. You have to publish more information than LTDs. Larger size may slow decision making, could become inflexible. So lots and lots of points that you can make from a question that you might initially think, gosh, this is a really hard one, because they're actually quite similar to each other. Okay, so I think that's the end of the specification, just an overview of privatisation and nationalisation, and it's just most important points are: do you know what sole traders are, partnerships are, private limited companies and public limited companies, and the benefits and disadvantages of each of those structures?